"Do whatever you want, cowboy," said the tied-up Apache woman. But what happened surprised everyone. The sun hung low over the jagged canyon, casting long shadows that stretched like dark fingers across the desert floor. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying the faint scent of sage and sand. Somewhere in the twisting paths of the canyon, a woman struggled against rough ropes that bit into her wrists. Her name was Liana. She was Apache, proud and fierce, with eyes that held the fire of her ancestors. Even as the ropes cut into her skin, she refused to show fear. She glared at the figure approaching through the heat haze, lips curling into a sharp, bitter smile. "Do whatever you want, cowboy," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. "I'm tied up anyway." The man paused, his shadow falling over her. He was Colton, a cowboy known in the region as a loner with a dangerous reputation. Broad-shouldered, with sun-baked skin and eyes the color of storm clouds, he had a way of making people respect him and fear him. But Liana did neither. She tested him with defiance. Colton studied her silently. Most would have assumed she was helpless, a prize to be taken or a threat to be eliminated. But something in him, honor or perhaps curiosity, made him pause. "You've got fire," he said finally, voice low and calm. "Not the smart kind, but fire nonetheless." "I survive," Liana replied, refusing to meet his gaze directly. Her eyes scanned the canyon, looking for any way to escape. "Do you?" Colton didn't answer. Instead, he circled her slowly, inspecting the ropes, the knots, and the surrounding terrain. Something in the way he moved suggested patience, a careful calculation rather than cruelty. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a whisper of voices. Liana's heart skipped. The canyon had always felt alive, but now it seemed almost aware of her presence, almost warning her. She tightened her jaw and stared at Colton again. "Why are you here?" she demanded. "I know who you are. You don't help anyone for free." Colton's eyes flicked toward the horizon. "Not here for free," he said, "but I'm not here to hurt you either. Not yet, anyway." She let out a bitter laugh, the sound echoing off the rocks. "You're a strange kind of man, cowboy, strange or honest, which is worse." Colton knelt slightly to examine the ropes. "If I untie you, do you run?" "I'd like to," she admitted reluctantly. "But I'd also like to see you try to stop me first." He smirked faintly, the hint of humor softening his rough features. "Not your usual cowboy, huh?" Liana didn't respond. Instead, she shifted slightly, testing the ropes again. They held fast. She had been captured during a raid gone wrong, and now she was bound in the canyon by forces she couldn't yet understand. Yet she would not show weakness, not in front of him or anyone else. Colton reached into his satchel and produced a small knife. He moved carefully, undoing the knots but not fully cutting the ropes. "You should know," he said quietly, "there's more than just me in this canyon. Things not human, things that don't forgive." Liana's eyes narrowed. "Not human?" she asked, though a flicker of fear passed over her face. She had heard the old stories, whispered among her people. Shadows that walked without bodies, spirits that haunted the desert, and curses older than the mesas themselves. Colton didn't respond immediately. He only worked on the ropes with steady hands, eyes scanning the canyon edges. The wind shifted again, carrying a strange, almost musical sound like a voice trying to speak from far away. "You hear that?" Liana asked, her voice quieter now. Colton nodded slightly. "I do." "Stay still." The shadows of the canyon seemed to stretch unnaturally, and the air grew heavy. Liana's heart pounded in her chest. She had faced many dangers in her life, bandits, wild animals, even betrayal. But something about this canyon felt different. It wasn't just danger, it was judgment. Something ancient was watching, weighing her every move. Suddenly, the sand shifted near the cliffs and a shadow moved. Not like a person, not like an animal, but something that slithered across the rocks without sound. Liana tensed, instinct screaming at her to flee, even though the rope still held her. Colton placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Don't move," he warned, his voice low and urgent. Liana swallowed hard. What is it?" He shook his head slowly. "Not something I've seen before, something old, something patient." The shadow paused as if it had noticed them, then vanished into the rocks, leaving only a strange, cold stillness behind. Liana exhaled, her body trembling. "You're calm," Colton said, his hand still steady on her shoulder. "I expected more screaming." "I'm not calm," she snapped, though her voice was weaker than she intended. "I just don't waste energy on fear." Colton studied her, noting the pride and fire in her eyes. He saw something familiar, the same stubbornness he carried in his own heart. Perhaps that was why he had not harmed her when he first found her. "Listen," he said finally, motioning for her to lean slightly toward him. "This canyon, it's cursed. Or maybe it's not cursed but alive, and it doesn't like trespassers. We need to move before it decides we're too interesting to leave alone." Liana hesitated. "And if I don't want your help?" "You don't have a choice," Colton replied simply. "Not here." He cut the last rope binding her hands, leaving them free but leaving her ankle tethered to a heavy rock. Liana flexed her wrists, testing her freedom, and then glared at him. "I owe you nothing," she said, though a flicker of gratitude passed through her eyes. "You'll live longer if you at least follow me," he said. "But if you run, don't expect me to stop anything else in this canyon from finding you." They moved carefully through the narrow canyon paths, Colton leading and Liana following, alert to every whisper of the wind. The shadows seemed to shift around them, twisting unnaturally, and at every turn Liana felt as if invisible eyes were watching, judging, waiting. After some time, they reached a wider part of the canyon, where the sun's last light spilled across the desert floor. The wind died down, leaving an eerie silence. Liana glanced at Colton. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. "You could have left me for the canyon to decide my fate." Colton didn't answer immediately. He squinted toward the distant cliffs as if measuring the risk. Then he said, "Because you're alive. And because I've seen enough people lose themselves to the canyon's shadows to know it's smarter to watch the living than mourn the dead." Liana blinked, unsure what to say. Most people she had met would have hidden a cruel smile behind words like that. Colton's expression was earnest, though, and she couldn't tell if that made her relief stronger or her suspicion deeper. As the darkness grew, a sudden movement caught her eye. A figure emerged from behind a rock formation, a tall, spectral silhouette that moved with unnatural grace. Liana's stomach clenched. She recognized the figure immediately, though she hadn't expected to see them again. Her heart stopped. The figure stepped closer and the wind carried a strange, chilling sound. It was someone from her past, someone thought lost forever. And now they stood before her, silent but watching, their presence sending a shiver down her spine. Colton noticed her change in expression. "Who is it?" he asked, his hand tightening slightly on the hilt of his knife. Liana couldn't answer. Her throat felt dry, her mind racing. Fear, anger, and a strange hope collided within her. This person was not supposed to be here, not alive, not in this cursed canyon. Yet here they were, stepping out of the shadows, a silent judge of everything she had endured. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the desert was bathed in twilight, the first stars glimmering above. Liana's pulse thundered in her ears. Colton stepped protectively in front of her. "Whoever you are," he said, his voice low but firm, "you stay back, she's with me." The figure paused, then raised a hand slowly. The gesture was neither threatening nor friendly, just a signal, a reminder of unfinished business, a presence that promised the coming of a reckoning. Liana swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "It can't be it, Ka." Colton looked at her, eyes sharp and questioning. "What is it? Who are they?" Before she could answer, the figure moved closer, and the shadows of the canyon seemed to twist around them, alive, as if the land itself acknowledged the arrival of something ancient, powerful, and dangerous. Liana's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she was tethered, bound by chains she had only just escaped, and by secrets she had yet to reveal. The wind whispered again, carrying a voice she thought she'd never hear. And then the figure spoke. "I've been waiting," it said, voice soft but filled with weight, "for you to find your way back." Liana's eyes widened. Colton's hand tightened around hers. And in that moment, the desert canyon seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the storm that was about to begin. The canyon was silent after the first whispers of twilight. Stars blinked faintly above, and the desert wind carried the chill of coming night. Liana's pulse still thundered from the appearance of the figure from her past, a presence that seemed to hang in the shadows like a question she could not yet answer. Colton's hand remained on hers, steady and protective. He didn't speak immediately. He waited, as if measuring the canyon itself, listening to the silent warning in the shifting wind. The figure moved with a grace that was almost unnatural, gliding rather than walking. Its face remained hidden in shadow, but Liana knew instantly who it was. Cale, a man from her past whose disappearance had haunted her for years. He had been more than a friend. He had been someone she trusted completely, someone she had thought lost forever. "Cale," she breathed, her voice trembling slightly despite her pride. Cale did not answer. He only nodded once, a silent acknowledgement before stepping back into the darkness. It was enough. Liana understood. He was warning them. Colton's voice broke the tense silence. "We don't have time to stand here talking. This canyon, it's not safe." Liana's eyes darted to him, noting the seriousness in his expression. She nodded, and together, they moved deeper into the canyon, following a narrow path that led toward an abandoned fortress perched on a rocky mesa. The fortress had been built long ago, abandoned for centuries, but it was rumored to hold secrets powerful enough to challenge the curses of the land. The journey was difficult. The desert wind howled through the canyon walls, carrying sand that stung their faces and eyes. Strange shadows danced at the edge of their vision, and at times, Liana could swear the canyon itself shifted underfoot. "This place feels alive," she whispered, gripping her staff, a piece of carved wood she had always carried, a symbol of her people and their strength. Colton glanced at her. "Alive and not friendly, keep close." Despite the tension, Liana felt a strange sense of relief at his words. He was cautious, but he was also trustworthy. More than anyone she had met in a long time, he seemed to understand danger without fear, and that steadiness was oddly comforting. As they approached the fortress, the ground beneath them seemed to pulse slightly, like the land itself had a heartbeat. Liana's chest tightened. She had heard stories passed down through her people, tales of bloodlines cursed by old magic, bound to the land in ways that could not be broken by simple acts of bravery. And now, she realized, those stories were not just stories. "Colton," she said, voice low, "there's something about me, something they never told anyone." Colton's gaze met hers. "What do you mean?" "My family, my bloodline carries a curse. It's old, older than this land itself," she explained. "It ties us to the spirits of the desert. We carry anger and grief that others cannot see, and if it is awakened," she shivered, "it can destroy everything around us." Colton nodded slowly as if he had suspected as much. "Then we face it together," he said firmly. "Whatever comes, we don't run, we fight." Liana studied him, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a protective shield. She had never allowed herself to trust anyone completely. But there was something in Colton, a rare combination of strength, patience, and understanding, that made her want to try. The fortress rose before them, dark and imposing against the night sky. Its stone walls were cracked and weathered, but the gates were intact, as if waiting for intruders like them. Liana and Colton entered cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the empty courtyard. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of age and dust. Shadows clung to the corners of the hall, twisting unnaturally in the flickering light of the torches Colton had carried. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. "This is no ordinary place," Liana whispered. "The spirits here, they are old, very old. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed through the hall, extinguishing their torches. Darkness surrounded them, and a whispering voice echoed through the corridors. "Who dares disturb the sanctuary of the lost?" Liana's heart raced. She recognized the voice. It was not human, yet it carried intelligence and judgment. Colton stepped in front of her, protective. "I am Colton, and this is Liana," he said firmly. "We mean no disrespect. We seek only knowledge and freedom from the curse that binds her." The shadows twisted, forming shapes that seemed to float just above the ground. One of the shapes took the form of a woman, ethereal and beautiful, yet terrifying in her perfection. Her eyes glowed like molten gold. "You carry the blood of the cursed," the spirit said, voice soft but sharp, "and yet you come seeking to undo what was set long ago." Liana stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "I do not wish to harm. I only wish to live free and to protect those I care about." The spirit studied her, tilting her head slightly. "Many have said the same. Few have the strength to face the truth. Do you?" I will," Liana replied, though doubt flickered in her heart. Colton placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You are not alone," he whispered. "I'm here." The spirit nodded once, then moved aside, revealing a small chamber beyond. At the center of the chamber lay an ancient relic, pulsing faintly with light. Liana could feel its energy tugging at her, stirring memories and emotions she had buried deep inside. "This is it," she murmured. "The key, maybe the only way to break the curse." As she reached for it, the chamber shivered. Shadows emerged from the corners, coalescing into figures that mirrored Liana's deepest fears. Failure, loss, and grief she had not yet faced. The figures circled her, whispering in voices that sounded like her own thoughts. Liana faltered. Her hands trembled as the whispers pressed into her mind. She wanted to retreat, to deny the presence of these shadows, but Colton's hand gripped hers firmly, anchoring her to the present. "Focus," he said quietly. "They are only shadows. You are stronger than your fear." Taking a deep breath, Liana closed her eyes and let the warmth of Colton's hand flow into her. Slowly, she faced the shadows, naming each fear aloud, speaking them into existence so they could no longer hide in the dark corners of her mind. The chamber trembled and the shadows wailed, dissipating into smoke and silence. Liana opened her eyes and found the relic glowing brighter, as if acknowledging her courage. But there was no time to rest. The ground shook violently and the walls of the fortress groaned under an unseen force. From the darkness, the spectral forms of bounty hunters, creatures bound to the curse's power, emerged, their eyes glowing red. Liana drew back instinctively, but Colton stepped forward. "Stay behind me," he commanded, drawing a long, iron-tipped staff. The battle was swift and brutal. The bounty hunters moved unnaturally, faster than any human could, yet Colton fought with skill honed over years of danger and survival. Liana found her courage again, striking with precision, guided by the energy of her bloodline, not fear. Together, they managed to push the attackers back, the relic pulsing stronger with every successful strike. Yet even as the last shadow dissolved, Liana felt a chill run down her spine. This was only the beginning. She looked at Colton, who was breathing heavily, his face streaked with sweat and dust. Despite the exhaustion, his eyes were steady, focused on her. "You're incredible," he said softly, admiration in his voice. Liana shook her head. "I couldn't have done it without you." He smiled faintly, brushing dust from her arm. "We're stronger together, don't forget that." For a moment, silence fell. They stood in the center of the chamber, the relic glowing warmly, the shadows gone and the fortress quiet once more. But in the back of Liana's mind, a nagging doubt remained. The figure from her past, Kale, was still out there. His presence lingered like a shadow, and she knew he had a reason for appearing now, for testing her courage. A sudden gust of wind blew through the fortress, carrying a whisper that made her blood run cold. "You have awakened more than you know," the voice said, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. Liana froze, glancing at Colton. "It's not over," she whispered. Colton nodded, his hand still gripping hers. "No, and whatever comes next, we face it together." They left the fortress, stepping into the desert night. The stars shone above, indifferent to the struggles below, and the wind carried a promise of trials yet to come. And somewhere in the darkness, Kale watched, a shadow among shadows, waiting for the moment when Liana would have to choose, between fear and courage, past and future, life and the unknown. The desert night stretched endlessly, the stars faintly twinkling above like distant eyes. Watching from another world. Liana and Colton moved cautiously through the rocky paths, their footsteps echoing softly against the canyon walls. The fortress behind them lay in darkness, but the memory of the shadows they had fought still lingered in Liana's mind. She could feel the energy of the relic from the fortress pulsing in her blood, a reminder of the curse she carried and the power she had yet to control. Every step she took reminded her that she was not only fighting for her survival, but for the freedom of her people, her ancestors, and herself. Colton walked beside her, silent for the moment, his eyes scanning the desert as if he could see danger before it even arrived. She had learned to trust his instincts. They were always sharp, always aware, but even he couldn't predict everything the desert might throw at them. "You're quiet," Liana said softly, breaking the silence. Colton glanced at her, a faint shadow of a smile on his lips, thinking. "You know me, I don't talk unless it matters," Liana frowned. "I think everything matters." He chuckled faintly, though the sound didn't reach his eyes. "Fair enough, but tonight we need more than words. We need to survive." They had traveled far from the fortress, seeking a place rumored to hold guidance. An ancient grove hidden in the desert, where the spirits of the land were said to teach those brave enough to listen. Liana's heart raced with anticipation and fear. She had never been one to trust spirits, and yet the events of the canyon had proven that some forces were beyond human understanding. The wind shifted again, carrying with it a whisper that made Liana pause. "Colton, do you hear that?" He nodded, his hand brushing against hers. "I hear it. Keep close." The whisper grew louder as they approached a cluster of ancient trees at the edge of a rocky cliff. The trees were twisted, gnarled with age, and their branches seemed to reach out like arms, almost welcoming them or warning them. "This is it," Liana murmured, awe in her voice. "The grove of the ancestors." Colton studied her carefully. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Liana hesitated. She wanted to run to avoid the trials that awaited, but she also knew that running would not save her. "Not now, not ever." "I have no choice," she said firmly. "If I don't face this, the curse will never end." Together, they stepped into the grove. The air shifted immediately, heavy with the scent of earth and ancient magic. Shadows moved at the edge of their vision, and soft voices seemed to whisper from the trees. Liana could almost hear the voices of her ancestors, urging her forward, warning her, guiding her. A figure emerged from the largest tree, glowing faintly in the dim light. The spirit was tall, regal, and radiated an authority that made Liana instinctively bow her head. Colton stepped protectively in front of her, but the spirit's gaze passed over him, acknowledging his presence without hostility. "You have come," the spirit said, voice echoing like wind through the canyon. "You seek to break the chains that bind your bloodline. But power comes at a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Liana straightened her back, her voice steady. "I am willing, whatever it takes." The spirit nodded once, then moved closer. "Then you must face what you fear most. The curse is not in the blood alone, but in the memories you carry, in the guilt you bear, and in the anger that binds your spirit." Liana's chest tightened. She had carried anger for years, blaming herself for things beyond her control. The shadow of her past seemed to stretch long and heavy across her shoulders. She swallowed hard. I am ready." Colton's hand found hers again, anchoring her in the present. "You're not alone," he whispered. "Remember that." The spirit extended its hand, and suddenly the grove dissolved around them. Liana found herself in a vision of her past, the village where she grew up, the faces of her family, the moment she lost someone dear. Shadows of her fears and regrets coalesced, swirling around her in a storm of memory and emotion. "You cannot hide from what haunts you," the spirit's voice echoed. "Face it, or it will consume you." Liana's heart pounded. She had wanted to forget, to push away the pain, but now she realized that confronting it was the only way forward. She took a deep breath, grounding herself with Colton's steady presence. Slowly, she began to speak, naming each fear, each regret, each pang of guilt. "I am not my mistakes," she said firmly, her voice echoing in the vision. "I am not my fear. I am stronger than the darkness." The shadows wavered, shifting and shrinking as her words gained power. Colton's presence beside her gave her courage, and for the first time she felt the anger and grief transform into determination. The storm of shadows exploded in light, and when the vision ended, they found themselves back in the grove. Liana gasped, her chest heaving. The relic from the fortress pulsed once more, glowing with a steady, warm light. She had faced her inner darkness and survived, but there was no time to rest. From the desert beyond the grove, a chilling howl echoed, followed by the sound of footsteps faster than any human could run. "They're coming," Liana whispered, her hand tightening around Colton's. Colton nodded, drawing his staff with a practiced motion. "Then let's not wait for them to find us." The bounty hunters, creatures bound to the curse's power, appeared at the edge of the grove. Their eyes glowed red and their forms were twisted, almost skeletal, moving with inhuman speed. They had followed them from the fortress, drawn by the energy of the relic and the awakening of Liana's courage. Colton moved like lightning, defending Liana as they fought side by side. Liana struck with precision, her newfound inner strength guiding her hands. Every blow, every movement was fueled not by fear, but by courage. The bounty hunters faltered under the unexpected power and unity of their bond. Even so, the battle was brutal. The creatures were relentless, and for a moment it seemed as though they might be overwhelmed. Liana faltered, exhaustion and doubt threatening to consume her. "Focus," Colton shouted, gripping her shoulder. "We can do this together." Liana nodded, summoning every ounce of strength. She struck at the nearest hunter with a surge of energy that made it stumble. Colton followed with a powerful strike of his staff, sending another creature sprawling. Step by step, blow by blow, they pushed the attackers back. The relic's glow intensified as though lending them strength, until finally, the last hunter dissolved into shadows that scattered across the grove. They stood panting, the desert night quiet once more. Liana's hands shook, not from fear but from the release of tension and the power she had wielded. Colton's hand found hers again, steady and reassuring. "You did it," he said softly, admiration in his voice. "We did it," Liana corrected, a small smile touching her lips. "I couldn't have, not without you." Colton's eyes softened. "You're stronger than you know, never forget that." For a moment they stood together in silence, the wind rustling through the trees, the relic glowing faintly behind them. The bond between them had deepened, forged in the fires of battle and the courage of the heart. But even as relief washed over Liana, a shadow lingered in her mind. Cale. She knew he had watched them, observing from the edges, testing her strength, her courage, and perhaps even her heart. Why had he returned? What did he want from her now? A sudden gust of wind carried a whisper through the grove, chilling her to the bone. "You have done well, but the greatest test is yet to come." Liana's breath caught. She looked at Colton, whose eyes were sharp and wary. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Colton shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but whatever it is, we face it together. No matter what." The desert beyond the grove stretched into darkness, full of secrets, dangers, and mysteries. And somewhere in that darkness, Cale moved like a shadow, watching, waiting, knowing that soon Liana would have to make a choice that could change everything. The stars above seemed to blink in silent warning, and the wind carried the scent of fire and possibility. The night was far from over. The first light of dawn stretched across the desert like liquid gold, touching the mesas, the canyon walls, and the grove with a soft glow. Liana stood at the edge of the cliff, her eyes fixed on the horizon, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face for the first time in what felt like years. Colton stood behind her, steady and quiet as he always did. He did not speak, but his presence was enough. His hand brushed hers once, a gentle reminder that she was not alone, that whatever came next, they would face it together. The relic from the fortress had been placed carefully in the grove, its light fading into a steady pulse as if resting after the trials they had endured. Liana's bloodline, the curse that had haunted her family for generations, still lingered, but now, for the first time, she felt a choice. She could either be bound by it or free herself from it. A shadow moved at the edge of her vision. Liana turned sharply. Cale stepped forward, his expression unreadable. For so long he had been the ghost of her past, the memory she could not escape. Now he stood before her in the light of dawn, real and alive, carrying the weight of his own secrets. "Cale," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Why are you here?" "I came to see if you were ready," he replied, voice low and serious. "The curse, it isn't just about your blood. It's about choices, forgiveness, and courage. You cannot break it without facing what lies between you and the past." Liana's chest tightened. The past had always been a shadow, trailing behind her, whispering guilt and regret. She had carried anger and grief for so long that it had become a part of her. Yet now, facing Cale, she realized that some chains were not made of ropes or magic. They were made of the heart. Colton stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her back. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "I'm with you, always." Liana took a deep breath. The desert wind carried a whisper of magic, the lingering energy of the grove, the relic, and her ancestors. She knew that breaking the curse would require more than courage. It would require forgiveness. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving herself. She faced Cale directly, her eyes steady. "I am ready," she said. "Tell me what I must do." Cale nodded once, and the air around them seemed to hum. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath. "You must confront the source of the curse," he said, "not as a victim, but as the daughter of your people. You must offer the anger, the grief, and the guilt that binds your bloodline, and in return, you will be free." Liana closed her eyes, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on her. She thought of her family, of the village she had lost, of mistakes she had blamed herself for. She thought of the lives that had been touched by the curse, the pain that had rippled through the desert like wind-blown sand. And she thought of Colton, whose strength and faith in her had given her the courage to face it all. Slowly, she began to speak, naming every grief, every regret, every sorrow she had carried. "I forgive you, I forgive myself. I release the anger that binds my spirit." Her voice grew stronger with each word, echoing across the desert. Colton's hand tightened around hers, lending her courage. Together, they repeated the words, as if the union of their hearts gave the magic its true power. The relic glowed brighter, pulsing with energy that spread through the grove, the canyon, and the desert beyond. The wind picked up, circling them, carrying the whispers of spirits, approval, recognition, and finally, release. A wave of warmth passed through Liana, as though the desert itself embraced her. The chains of the curse, both literal and metaphorical, fell away, dissolving into dust that shimmered like gold in the sunlight. She opened her eyes, and for the first time she felt light, freedom, and hope. Cale stepped back, a small smile on his lips. "You have done it," he said quietly. "The curse is broken." Liana looked at him, a mixture of relief and confusion in her eyes. "Then you were here to test me," Cale nodded. "To see if you were ready to claim your own life, your own future, and now you are. The rest is yours to choose." She turned to Colton, whose eyes held a warmth and pride that made her heart ache with something she had never allowed herself to feel fully: trust and love. "You were with me the whole time," she said softly. I always will be, he replied, his hand finding hers again. Through every shadow, every trial, every sunrise. For a long moment they simply stood together, the desert stretching endlessly before them. The sun rose higher, bathing the mesas and canyons in a golden light, erasing the shadows that had haunted them for so long. Yet even in that moment of peace, a faint whisper of magic lingered on the wind, a reminder that the desert was alive and that stories, once begun, never truly ended. Kale stepped forward one last time. Your path is yours now. Choose it with courage and you will never falter. Liana nodded, feeling the weight of her ancestors lift, leaving her lighter, freer, stronger. She had faced the past, conquered her fears, and broken the chains of the curse. But more importantly, she had discovered that courage, love, and trust were the true magic that would guide her future. Colton took her hand in both of his, holding it tightly. Where do we go from here? He asked, a small smile playing on his lips. Liana looked out across the desert at the mesas, the canyons, and the endless sky above. We go forward, she said, together, and whatever comes, we face it as one. The relic's light faded gently, leaving a warm glow that seemed to merge with the sunlight. The grove, the canyon, and the desert felt alive, peaceful, yet charged with possibility. Liana felt the pulse of the land beneath her feet, no longer a source of fear, but a source of strength. Kale bowed slightly, a final farewell. You are ready, he said. Go and live. And with that, he disappeared into the desert, leaving Liana and Colton alone in the vast, golden morning. They began their journey back toward the canyon's edge, moving with confidence and a newfound freedom. The wind carried the scent of sage and sand, a reminder that the desert, like life, was full of both danger and beauty. As they walked, Liana glanced at Colton, her heart full. Thank you, she said softly, for everything, for not letting me face this alone. Colton smiled, a rare softness in his eyes. You never had to face it alone, and you never will, not while I'm here. For the first time in years, Liana allowed herself to feel completely unburdened. The anger, grief, and fear that had defined her life were gone, replaced by hope, trust, and the certainty that she could choose her own path. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but for Liana and Colton, it was no longer a place of danger and fear. It was a place of freedom, of possibilities, of new beginnings. And somewhere, far beyond the horizon, the desert whispered of future stories, of magic, and of love, stories that would be written by those brave enough to face the shadows and embrace the light. As they reached the top of a mesa, the sun fully risen, Liana and Colton paused. Side by side, they looked out across the endless desert. The wind tugged gently at Liana's hair, and Colton brushed a strand from her face, his touch lingering. You're ready, he said softly. I am, she replied, her voice steady and calm. And we will face whatever comes next, he said, together. Liana nodded, feeling a strength within her that she had never known. The curse was broken, the shadows had been faced, and the future stretched before them like the desert itself, boundless, beautiful, and theirs to claim. As they descended the mesa, the wind carried a final whisper, a gentle reminder that life and magic, courage and love are never truly separate. They are all connected, flowing together like the sun over the desert, illuminating every shadow, every heart, every soul. And with that, Liana and Colton stepped into their new life, together, free, and ready for whatever adventure awaited beyond the horizon.